words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without demand. And so therefore, if we want a better life for ourselves, we must demand of that power. I often hear young people today. Last night I was invited by a friend of mine who is from Ghana and he's in South Africa as well. So we went out for some dinner and spent some time with some young people. And I often hear young people today say things like this. You know, it's time for young people to rise. It's time for the old people to move out of the way. It's time, it's time, it's time. Let me tell you, young people, there is no old person going anywhere. If you want that seat in that office, in that boardroom, in that chamber, in that ministry, you're going to have to fight for it because power isn't given, it's taken. And so the question as our continent rises is, will we be men and women of courage? Will we be the generation in 50 years' time that our children reference and say, they did it right? They had the template for how to truly pull out of each other the ability to work with each other. And something fascinating is happening today. I must tell you this. This is the good news. The good news is that we're no longer separated. The good news is that we find each other. The good news is that in this room, there are people who are following Vusi Thembekwayo on Instagram. I know I'm very good looking on Instagram, I must tell you, I am very good looking on Instagram. But the good news is that even I have the privilege of following a Professor Lumumba's work. No matter where in the world I find myself, where there are Africans who are speaking, leading, evangelizing, and growing others, we now have the ability to find each other. The true question is, will we have the ability to build with each other? You see, to date, our building strategies all center on these borders that were drawn for us and not by us. And so it becomes the question of, is your nation thriving versus mine? I had this conversation with a friend of mine who also works in capital markets like me in South Africa. I said, I'm really confused by this feud we have with Nigeria. I genuinely don't understand it. Why do we constantly migrate to the global north and South Africa tries to posture against Nigeria and Nigeria against South Africans? What's the game here? What's the gambit? Whom is it that we're trying to please and against whom are we trying to please them? Because each time we find our leaders playing that game, the question perhaps we should ask is, who is the master you're trying to please? In this moment and in this season, I think as a generation, we are called to truly understand what it's going to take, one and all, to work with each other, but to build with each other. This is, I think, the generational mission of the platform. I said this to my brother, Pastor Pojo, the last time, and I will say it now here publicly, that what has started as the platform Nigeria, in my mind, needs to be the platform Africa. It needs to bring together leaders in various spheres and various spaces who are at the frontier of what it's going to take to truly take our continent to next, whatever next might be, and have them in a single platform sharing ideas about what next looks like. In my world, I spend an awful lot of time looking for investment arbitrage, an awful lot of time looking for the ability to buy X and sell at Y in a particular time period and make sure that my risk, what we would call in finance your risk adjusted for the cost of taking that risk, make sure that you earn a return that is commensurate to what the investors are looking for. And often one of the things we do as investment professionals is where we might lack the opportunity to find a true, a meaningful arbitrage, is we will invent it just by purely looking at the various countries and citizens and the natures of those countries and where there might be an underweighting one asset class of another. That is to say, rather than meaningfully creating and adding value, we're skimming off the top of the cappuccino and milking the froth. And every time you do, the investors are simply asking the question, is there froth, rather than, have you made a fresh cup of cappuccino? So in this moment then, and in this season, it's important that we unite, that we truly pull each other towards each other. I will say it here. I will unite with any man and woman to do right. I will unite with nobody to do wrong. Amongst our greatest naiveties, I think, is that we presuppose that in the world of good and evil, it exists a little bit like it does in the superhero movies. It's how we approach the world. There's a bad scenario and superhero flies in and saves things. And then forever and a day, things will be better after that. Reality does not mirror that expectation. In reality, most people are complex. Most societies are complex. The challenge for us is whether or not we individually can be a force for good, a true force for greatness. When I was prepping for this, Pastor Pojo, I did something interesting. I'm an analytical mind. I work in the world of finance. So in my world, if you want to prove something, you put it in a spreadsheet. And if it's in a spreadsheet, you can put it on a graph. And if it's on a graph, it must be true. Nobody debates a graph. So in preparation for this, I arced my mind back and I looked at 10 of Africa's largest economies between the years 1956 and 1968. And I looked at what it was that made up those economies. I looked in that particular period because that was the transitory period in our continent. What I wanted to seek and find was to answer a simple question. What does it take for Africans to be great? It's a simple question. Now, because of the nature of my work, I went and looked for the actual thing that I could prove here, the scientific thing that I could go statistically, if you do these things, on a balance of probabilities, you will achieve whatever greatness is defined as for you. And here is what I found. I found that in every instance where there was a particular set of factors that made a population group or a citizenry or a nation achieve its goals, if you took those very same factors and plugged them into a different citizenry, the numbers would not tally. That is to say the following, that beyond strategy, beyond information, beyond policy, formations, and conversations, all of which, by the way, are fundamental. There is a single truism that holds, an ingredient without which the coffee doesn't taste good, and the ingredient is this: choice. Do the people of those countries choose to be great? You know this is true, by the way, because there are a lot of choices we make as people that filter into just how we think about ourselves. When you say or hear people say things like, this is just how we do things in Nigeria, that kind of statement is often diminutive. It reduces us to the basic bare minimum and says, accept this because this is the standard. In other words, even though we could choose better, we choose what we just get. That greatness is truly a choice.